From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I am Soyini Grey. Mexico's rescue workers attended a religious ceremony to mark the anniversary of two deadly earthquakes. One devastated the country a year ago, claiming around 400 lives, but the first, in 1985, killed more than 10,000 people. Rescuers say the country needs to be better prepared for these tragedies.
As we were hit again, the new generation realized that it is not a joke, that we need to be prepared, and we must get closer to the civil protection.
Around 1:14 p.m., the moment the quake struck, rescuers and even President Peña Nieto stood in silence with fists raised. Rescue workers had used the gesture to request quiet as they listened for signs of life below the rubble. Shortly after, authorities activated quake alarms, and office workers began carrying out practice runs for emergency evacuations of buildings, as had been tradition before the quake struck. But mere hours before the memorial event, security forces violently evicted residents of a central neighborhood in Mexico City. 100 police officers in riot gear were deployed to evict people squatting outside a building damaged by last year's earthquake. Dozens of civilians were left injured after violent clashes broke out. The victims say they were supposed to enter the building to reclaim their possessions, but were surprised by the arrival of the police. Most of those affected belong to the indigenous Otomi community.
They didn't have an eviction order. They just arrived and started attacking everyone. They hit a number of women, they even hit children. That is beyond unjust.
We are here because we don't have the resources to go anywhere else.
Political crisis averted. Peru's opposition-run Congress has renewed its confidence in the cabinet of President Martin Vizcarra. In a high-stakes vote late on Wednesday, lawmakers upheld Peru's government.
82 votes in favor, 22 against, 14 abstentions. The question of confidence has been approved.
The vote is in. Victory for Vizcarra. 82-22 in favor of Peru's president. Vizcarra urged unity when he spoke with the media after emerging from Congress.
The confidence vote that I received today is not just from the executive, but also a show of confidence from all the people of Peru.
Vizcarra had maintained optimism throughout, but the stakes were high. A no-confidence vote would have cost him his cabinet and triggered new legislative elections. However, that was not the case. So what's next? Congress must now commit to passing President Vizcarra's judicial and political reforms.
What we have proposed are 4 projects for constitutional reform. What is to be reformed is the National Magistrates Council, which was already approved yesterday, and the 3 political reforms. The 4 need to be passed, and that is the request. I made an address to the nation on Sunday, and today I repeated this to the President of the Ministers' Council, to all ministers that were present, with the same willingness and strength.
Earlier on Wednesday, President of the Ministers' Council, Cesar Villanueva, arrived for the session of Congress, and he appealed to lawmakers.
I urge all Congress members in this session to approve the remaining 3 political reforms, which include no immediate re-election, a bicamerality, and the reform on the financing of political parties.
La bicameralidad y la reforma del financiamiento de los partidos políticos.
On Sunday, Vizcarra had called for a vote of confidence to force passage of his proposed legislation, which requires modifying the Constitution.
Over in Costa Rica, oil refinery workers are protesting government's proposed tax reforms. Demonstrators have blocked major highways around the country. They've also impeded access to Costa Rica's main commercial ports and fuel distribution sites. Congress is proposing increasing taxes to stem a growing fiscal deficit. We have more from Fernando Francia.
On Wednesday, trade unions met with government officials to discuss the possibility of starting talks and ending the ongoing general strike. But workers want the government to stop moving forward with the economic reform before any meaningful talks can take place. Therefore, the strike continues, with Thursday being its 11th day. A march to the Legislative Assembly is planned, along with road blockades in other areas of the country, with demands to end repression against protesters.
Now, protests continue in Argentina as well. Edgardo Esteban has more.
On this day, September 20th, Argentina celebrates National Pensioners' Day. Marches are being planned to the Congressional Plaza to show the difficulties recent economic reforms have brought to this sector of society. The reforms by the Cambiamos Alliance government, in part, reduced the budget for pensions, which meant that back in March, pensions increased by barely 5%. This is one of the many cutbacks and recessive measures implemented by the government that directly affect those most vulnerable. As inflation nears 50%, senior citizens have seen their purchasing power diminished, not to mention the recent reductions in subsidies for medicine. Today's protests will demand an end to these measures and also a stop to a proposal that would push back the retirement age by 5 years.
We thank Edgardo for that report. The National Liberation Army has freed another kidnapped victim in Colombia. On Wednesday, the ELN freed a teenager who was kidnapped 2 weeks before in northwestern Colombia. The rebels handed the girl over to the Ombudsman's office. She was abducted from her home in Arupa. The government believes the ELN is holding around 10 hostages. President Ivan Duque has said that in order to resume peace talks, the ELN must release all of their hostages.
The release of this girl, without any condition, as the ELN did with the other 9 kidnapped, is the minimum that the Colombian people expected. Hopefully, the ELN will continue demonstrating that it will fulfill the conditions expressed by the president.
Brazil's presidential campaign continues, and the Workers' Party candidate, Fernando Haddad, has jumped to second place, according to recent polls. For more on the election, let's hear from our correspondent, Andre Vieira, in Rio.
Fernando Haddad, the presidential candidate for the Workers' Party, has consolidated second place in the latest polls. The Ibope Institute shows that Haddad has jumped 11% to reach the second place and holds now 19% of the voting intention. In the first position, the candidate of the far right, Jair Bolsonaro, with 28%, and the center candidate, Ciro Gomes, has 11%. The biggest challenge for the Fernando Haddad is to gather all the votes from Lula da Silva, who lead all the polls for the new candidates Haddad, and his vice-presidential candidate, Manuela Dávila, from Brazil's Communist Party. There are less than 20 days to go until the elections. Haddad is now on a countrywide campaign to tell all Brazilians that he is supported by Lula, by Dilma Rousseff, and the progressive movement in the country. He will continue campaigning in the state of São Paulo, one of the largest and with the highest amount of votes.
We'll take a short break now. More news in a minute.
Our actions have an impact on the environment. It's our responsibility to change for the sake of our planet. Let's be part of this transition. Watch, preserve, and protect your Earth. Green Zone. Wednesdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. The governor of the Central Bank of Barbados has announced the restructuring of the domestic debt. Economists say it could mean people will lose money as they will get less returns on their investments in the form of government bonds. And the government had said earlier there was no other alternative to tackle the country's massive debt burden. Prime Minister Mia Mottley has been in talks with the International Monetary Fund about reprofiling the debt.
You will see for these structures that are being offered that they're being amortized, I think in most cases quarterly. So it means that every quarter a little bit of that bond, so it was $100,000, but in the first quarter you might be getting, let's say, $1,000, the next quarter another $1,000. So you're being repaid gradually, but as you're being repaid, that also helps to reduce the stock of debt.
Now, our correspondent in Bridgetown, Kareem Smith, provides details on Barbados' debt burden.
Of course, government's current debt, which has risen to 157% of GDP, is simply too large at this point. We also know that the previous government was engaging in the dangerous practice of borrowing money from the central bank to meet its local obligations, also known as printing money, particularly to pay the salaries of the country's large public sector, which currently provides important services like healthcare and education up to the tertiary level. Of course, it's expected government under the current International Monetary Fund program will be looking to reduce its wage bill and perhaps explore the option of privatization to ensure a crisis of this nature, an economic crisis of this nature, doesn't happen again. I was also speaking to a local economist, Jeremy Stevens, who reminded me that Barbados is the third most indebted country in the world on a per capita scale, leaving the new Mia Mottley-led government to make somewhat unfavorable decisions which will invariably affect the average person on the street.
You've just heard our Kareem Smith make reference to the economy, Jeremy Stephen, in his report. So we decided to call on him to help us explain or to make sense of the economic situation Barbados now finds itself in. Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us. We know the situation was bad, but this seems really dire. Is Barbados broke? The governor of the central bank said pensioners are facing financial pain.
Yeah, I wouldn't say necessarily that the country is broke, but rather that we have a very dire situation financially, which required some cuts. Now, these cuts were a long time in coming. I'm glad that you spoke to pensioners because, unfortunately, I think the government the government definitely overthought or underthought how pensioners should have been treated in this situation. But then I was reading some reports that said that the NIS itself had a very large, huge burden, pretty much that had to do with being able to keep up with pension as well. And as a result of being able to keep up, so as a result of being able to keep up with those pension payments, the government really had to ensure that the NIS was affected. So unfortunately, everybody in the country, even if you are an individual holder of government debt, or if you are an institution, or if you're not, have been affected by these decisions. Even if, the country decides that we don't want to take on these losses, which are amounted up to about 37% by the estimates of the central bank. My estimates are just slightly less in terms of material losses. If you are an individual, or if you are, an individual who doesn't have any form of government debt, or if you are a pensioner who has no form of government debt, you are affected as well. So everybody is negatively affected.
Now, Jeremy, there's talk of reprofiling Barbados' debt. What does that mean in the case of Barbados?
Okay, so reprofiling debt just means that you're going to take old instruments or current instruments that they do have out there, some treasury bills, or all treasury bills up to September 30th, in actual fact. All debentures that were distributed up to September 30th, all treasury notes, all 5-year notes, and arrears as well, arrears to public institutions such as our water authority, even arrears by our university here, my employer. Those are being pulled together and new instruments are being created and given to creditors. The terms under these arrangements basically imply that you will have to wait 5 years before you can receive principal, and the interest that you would have charged on arrears or even would have expected to receive under the arrangements from your treasury bill investments to your debenture investments, those interest rates now have gone down, and all of them are the same. So for debt issued up to September 30th this year, you have one instrument basically, in a sense, as opposed to several different bonds and whatnot, one instrument where everybody's forced to wait 5 years to begin receiving their principal. But in the interim, you receive interest at a much lower rate. So it definitely it means that everybody's going to, like the commercial banks here, receive less profits from that activity, which had become up to a point a major activity for them, given the economy was slow. So that's less profits for them and less revenue from investing in government debt. Insurance companies will be affected. General insurers would definitely charge more premiums, higher premiums, as a result of not being able to generate a return on investment as sufficient as before. Charities that invest their excess donations will be affected. Credit unions, which is a massive movement here, they're definitely going to be affected.
Thank you so much for that explanation, because I needed it. But yesterday, Prime Minister Motley met with the Inter-American Development Bank. What do you expect to come out of that meeting?
Oh, the IADB is just providing funding to help retool government workers. So a major strategy that the government has right now is one where, yes, they're going to have to retrench workers. I remember you and I discussed this months ago. They're going to have to retrench workers. They haven't been given a number. But the Prime Minister doesn't want that people are out on the streets without some kind of work or some way to fill their time. So she figures that this is a major time to retool and retrain people for a digitized 21st century. Because the major, goal for government is to become a 21st century compliant government in terms of digitization. So to digitize records and whatnot. And definitely the government needs funding to do so. So as a result, they are borrowing money from the IADB and other sources in order to help retrain people that will be on the breadline of sorts.
So very early on in her tenure, like literally a few days after she was elected as Prime Minister, Mia Motley met with the International Monetary Fund. She met with the IADB yesterday. Are you happy with the steps and the measures that she's taking to try and save Barbados' economy?
My face always betrays me. I'm not necessarily happy. I'm not necessarily happy, but I will say that I saw it coming, just not necessarily as dire as they are making it out to be. And when I say dire, it doesn't mean that they are applying.
Jeremy, what I'm asking you is, what should she be doing? What do you think she should be doing?
Oh, no. All right. Well, what she should be doing is what she is doing, just not as dire as she's doing it.
Okay.
If you get where I'm coming from. So she's met with the IMF. She has signed off with the IMF, and the IMF now has to decide at their executive level, their board level, that they're going to give us the funding, $200 and something million in funding over 4 years. And one would hope that she uses it sufficiently. The only thing I would say that I would prescribe that's different is that I thought that they would be looking at growth measures to help the economy grow while going through this restructuring. Whereas the method of their madness, to speak right now, is let's retrench and get things right, and then we'll focus on growth. This is where we disagree philosophically.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. I appreciate your insight on this. Always a pleasure chatting with you. Other news now, the leaders of Trinidad and Tobago and Guyana have signed a major memorandum of understanding on energy sector cooperation. The MOU also includes cooperation in agriculture and security. The move comes as Guyana is in the midst of a rapidly expanding oil industry, but Guyana's private sector has been wary of Trinidad's involvement in their energy sector. And Grenada and China have also signed a multi-million-dollar memorandum of understanding. It's all part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. The MOU will allow Grenada to benefit from China's technological expertise to improve infrastructure. Grenada is the 6th Caribbean country to sign on to this MOU.
As you're well aware, we have undergone some serious transformation in the last 5 years or so, that China has been a faithful development partner in that process, in housing and in several other areas of our economy, in infrastructural development. And China, this initiative, Belt and Road Initiative, is another milestone in that regard. And it is expected, this initiative is expected to give Grenada access to what we call inexpensive capital. And for a developing country like Grenada, this is extremely important.
Time for another break. World News is next.
The Pakistani journalist Tariq Ali examines the mass media influence promoted by imperialism. Get access to the analysis of the socio-economic and political life of the whole South America on our screen and platform in English. A critical place committed to the truth to determine the major events that transform the world today. Mondays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. The three-day Inter-Korean Summit has ended, marking a new era of pledged peace. North Korea's Kim Jong-un said he would close down a missile test facility under the watch of international observers. The North also floated the possibility of scrapping its primary nuclear complex if the United States is willing to uphold negotiations. The historic summit took place in Pyongyang with North Korea's President Moon Jae-in visiting. The two countries have been at war with each other since 1950. It's now time for Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe to face North Korea's Kim Jong-un. Abe now wants to resolve issues between the two nations, including the abduction of a Japanese national by North Korea. According to Abe, a meeting is necessary for the peace and stability of the region. And now it's time to bring you some other stories from around the world.
A gunman was shot dead by police in Wisconsin, United States after he injured 4 people. The incident took place at a software company on Wednesday. People were seen running from the office covered in blood. So far, the identity and motive of the assailant are unknown. A protest against budget cuts to the United Nations Relief and Works Agency for Palestine Refugees, or UNRWA, has taken place in Gaza City. Salaries and services have been slashed due to the United States pulling their financial support. The UNRWA was helping 5 million Palestinian refugees.
The decision to end the contract of 1,000 employees that has been taken by the UNRWA administration is very dangerous. This decision cannot be accepted. Since it was made a month ago, we've tried with all the concrete and administrative ways and mediations, but the UNRWA administration refused all the solutions and insists on the dismissal of those employees. So we will continue our movement by all means, such as a big protest and open strikes.
Age pensioners clashed with riot police in Madrid, Spain on Wednesday as they protested for higher pensions. Demonstrators had to be held back as they tried to raid the Congress of Deputies building. Politicians had to leave dirty at Parliament to intervene.
In El Salvador, cyclists are charting the future of urban mobility. One non-profit organization called BC Red believes the rise in commuter cycling demands the urgent restructuring of urban planning and thinking.
It's an incentive to get pedalling. Cycling, it's a healthy form of exercise, an efficient means of transportation, and it doesn't harm the environment. It's no wonder bicycles are reclaiming their space on the crowded streets of South America. Members of Bicide are pioneering a two-wheel revolution. That's why they're urging government to move full speed ahead with the passage of legislation to ensure cyclist safety.
What is the advantage of using the bike from the health point of view, from the nature, environment point of view? It does not contribute to the climate change. Also, it's good from the economic and the traffic view, because where a car parks, 20 bicycles fit.
Parliamentarians were invited to get pedalling in the streets of El Salvador, but cycling safety can be a two-way street. The city is usually crammed with cars letting out exhaust fumes, and the reality is there are dangers facing cyclists on city roads.
Hay mucho accidente de tránsito, los automovilistas casi no respetan al motociclista.
There are a lot of car accidents. Car drivers don't respect motorcycles or bicycles, and the risk is higher for them. I think we should work in this proposal to promote the use of the bike as a way to help the environment. But we also have to establish terms that assure the respect of the cyclist.
Paralelamente habría que establecer las condiciones que garanticen el respeto al ciclista.
Meanwhile, lawmakers are giving urban cyclists the assurance that they're not about to backpedal on legislation to protect them on sometimes hostile streets.
In a few days, we are going to have the approval, because virtually it was fully discussed, and the proposals of this law are not only benefits for the cyclists, but also to the environment protection.
Sino también de proteger el medio ambiente a través del uso de la bicicleta.
During Cyclist Week, the public invited to take part in a range of activities, including rides with other Salvadorian bicycle groups. They're not reinventing the wheel, but they're hoping to change the face of urban commuting.
We've come to the end of this news brief. For these and many other stories, you can find them on our website at tellusyourtv.net/English. And join us on social media. We are on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Tell Us Your English, I'm Soyini Grey. Thank you so much for watching.